Welcome to the Bold Moves How Did You Know podcast, a podcast for the naturally curious who want to define their own path. I'm your host, Kristen Rocco, and here I'm sharing bold move stories that propelled my guests from curiosity to action. And in doing so, they've defined a path that is purposeful to them. Through these stories, I hope you'll be inspired to pursue your boldest dreams. Welcome back today, all of you bold movers and shakers. I am excited about today's episode. We are turning the tables, and I'm in the hot seat today. My friend and former podcast guest, Diana Murphy, invited me on to her podcast called The Leaders Table to interview me about a phenomenon that I have started to get curious about, and that is the topic around midlife crisis. Is 50 the new 40? Is 60 the new 50? These ages now feel just like a number. We're feeling better than ever. We're excited about our next chapters. And when you think about midlife crisis, you think about just that. Oh, we're in crisis. But all of the leaders I've been interviewing on this podcast have told a different story. One of energy and enthusiasm and excitement for what's next. So I started a question. That's when my curiosity popped up. Are we really in midlife crisis? Or should we reframe this narrative to a midlife click? I wanted to see if this phenomenon held true beyond the people that I'm speaking to on this podcast. Do other people feel like they're in midlife crisis, or do they actually feel like they're clicking in their midlife? So I asked. I sent out a poll on my LinkedIn and Instagram, and overwhelmingly people said, yeah, we're midlife clicking. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today. So let's turn it over to Diana about why it's time for us to reframe the narrative from midlife crisis to midlife click.
Oh, good morning, or I guess afternoon, Miss Kristen Rocco. Welcome to the Leaders Table. We are going to have discussions in the way that I love having them, through conversation. I have welcomed Kristen Rocco, who is a marketing specialist, and I'll let her introduce herself in a minute. But I met her at a gorgeous networking dinner where we both, when I saw her theme of bold and noteworthy branding, and I just did my brand and stepped into being more vulnerable in the way I'm showing up in my work, I knew you and I had values and maybe experiences that were similar, Kristen. And so welcome to the Leaders Table.
Thank you so much, Diana. I am really, really excited for this. I felt like when we met each other that first night, we had so much fun, a lot in common. And I think our ideas are, like you said, the bold concept, pretty similar.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a fun discussion today. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you are welcome. My intention on this podcast today is we are going to focus on a topic that Kristen brought to the table: midlife crisis or midlife click. And it wasn't really midlife for me, but I started my business 10 years ago yesterday, and
Congrats.
I was the ripe age of 55, and I knew I wanted to create a gorgeous business container so that I could be a coach. And that was a bold move for me then, because my peers were not doing the same thing. And so I am so thankful for people in the world having this conversation about doing things maybe a little bit differently that aren't the norm, and having a lot of encouragement to do so. So the Leaders Table, for everyone that might be new, this might be your first time on, listening to the show. This is all about having the conversations that we're dying to have with one another. And that is my intention. And then bringing to the table things that encourage and help people, again, here today, to make the bold moves that they're dying to make. So Kristen, would you introduce yourself and your business a little bit so we have some context of what you're sharing today? And I would love for you to just hop in on how you came to that midlife click versus midlife crisis and get us rolling here.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited for that discussion, Diana. I'm happy to introduce myself. I'm smiling ear to ear because I love what I'm doing. And I just got started on this new journey of mine about a year ago. I'm the founder of Bold and Noteworthy Marketing. I'm a fractional content marketer who helps companies leverage content marketing as their growth engine. So I design the strategy to help them understand their audience's needs and how that then connects to their brand. Essentially, I build the bridge between brand and audience so that brands can build nurturing relationships with their customers and ultimately grow their audience and leverage these amazing relationships they're building for business benefit. So that's what I do, working with clients of all different types and sizes over the past year, as I said, which is when I started my fractional content marketing agency. But prior to then, I'd spent 16 years doing this for brands. I built my career in content marketing, going even earlier than when content marketing was a thing. I started in PR, and the natural evolution of the space led me to content marketing. But I'm really passionate about it. I love brand building, and I love helping brands find those connection points with their audiences. So there's this mutually beneficial relationship between the audience and the brand.
I just love it. I have had 2 branding experiences that have just been gorgeous. They came at times that I was in a lot of transition, and I knew I was speaking already differently about the work I was doing, and then had branding experts to help me walk through the words, the colors, the photo shoot. And when you're in the middle of those projects, or considering them for the audience, like knowing that someone can help you bring to words to an experience of your brand with the type of expertise you bring. And it's like the type of awareness that people have had around my launch this winter was because I invested in the branding work. And I just want to say that out like big and out loud, because I could not have, it's like a language. I could not have expressed it any better than what my branding team did for me.
It's really powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just getting the right words to describe what you do in a way that your audience understands it can really move the needle. And that's why I named my company Bold and Noteworthy, because it is going beyond the bland. A lot of times it's hard ourselves to describe what we do in a powerful way. And I think that's what somebody can help with, is really getting into the meat of what you do and looking at it from a perspective of what does the audience need from you. And like I said, again, bridging that gap and helping the brand use the right language often to connect.
Yeah. And this is a plug for what a great experience. And I did not work with Kristen, but I know the work she's doing. But plugging for people that are in my audience, that when you are at a point where you're sheepish about sharing your website, or you don't love the pictures that you're pulling, you don't think that when people experience some of your written stuff, et cetera, that it doesn't feel like it fits anymore. That's what happened for me, that this is a gorgeous time to bring on someone like Kristen.
Well, thank you, Diana. I so appreciate that. There's another piece of my day-to-day, I suppose, that I really enjoy bringing into the world, which is my podcast called Bold Moves, How Did You Know? And it's this exploration around what bold people do to make the impact they're making, and really breaking it down from how did they start? Where did they start? And then how do they actually do it? In my own journey, about a year ago when I was making this transition, I always knew I had an entrepreneurial itch, but the steps aren't always that clear, are they, Diana?
No.
About like, how do I put one foot in front of the other to do everything that I want to do, everything that's on my vision board, for example. Sometimes it's like a lot of trial and error, but I also knew that there was an opportunity for me to learn from others. And so that's why I launched this podcast. And over that time, and we're going to get into the theme of this podcast, and I think this backstory is really helpful. But over the year I've been doing the podcast now, I've talked to, I think I'm at about 27 different interviews of people who have done, normal people, right? No different than you and I, Diana, but they're doing extraordinary things. They're living life on their own terms. I like to say that they're writing their own stories.
Yes.
And when I looked back at the patterns of behavior across all of these individuals, there were a few themes that popped up to me. One, I started to really uncover how people make bold moves. So even the process, there are three categories or three buckets, as I call them. I call it actually the comprehensive framework that I created is called the bold moves recipe. And within that, there are three different ingredients for how people make bold moves. The first one is about your desire. So really internally understanding what it is you want. And Diana, I don't mean just at the surface level. I mean going really deep into knowing who you are and creating this vision for yourself. That is definitely ingredient number one. Ingredient number two is all about who. So I know that might sound strange to people. It's like, what do you mean who? Well, what I mean by that is we need other people to show us what's possible, to learn from, to collaborate with, to brainstorm with, to bounce ideas off of. And that is the way, how I kind of talked about earlier on, like, how do I know how to get from point A to point B when sometimes it wasn't clear? It's the who piece.
Yes.
It's by talking to different people. It's by going to networking events. It's by, learning from others, asking your questions to help you get the answers. That is why, the second ingredient is who. And then the final ingredient to the bold moves recipe is action. And I'm sure, Diana, right, we can all agree that all of this other stuff is great and wonderful, but you have to put it into action to make it a reality. And so I started uncovering this framework of how to make a bold move. And then I also started to talk to these podcast guests. Like, I started to understand that all of my podcast guests are kind of around my age, right? Which is like midlife. I would consider it midlife. And I started to think about the concept of midlife crisis. And I thought to myself, well, gosh, nobody that I'm speaking to who's making bold moves is in crisis. It's all clicking for them. So there was this real dichotomy between, or this notion of the midlife crisis that has been imparted upon our society to what I'm actually uncovering and experiencing in my interviews. And so that's how this all came to me, this midlife click.
Well, and when you described it, it was a lot. I resonated with it because it's the space where coaching is so key. It's the corporate executive that has been maybe not a rainmaker, but a huge, gorgeous expert. And they open up their own practice and they are rubbing up against what's expected. And they want to do it a great, their way. And for some reason, we so often when we do something new, we make a bold move. A bold move is leaving a gorgeous large corporation and then opening up your small business. And where we think that everyone outside of us has better information than our own desire and the type of lifestyle we want. And where I have been having so much fun coaching is helping people to realize very quickly that if they lean into their genius and stop listening to, oh, this should be the time of life you do this, or you've accomplished this, or, that you stop listening to anything outside and you go deep on what you really want in terms of lifestyle, the type of people you want to work with. And that creates the click. And so I resonated with wanting to bring this up because I'm a woman who I've done everything against what was expected of me. Really, except for getting married right out of college. And I considered not taking his name. And between us, that was not a fight on his part or whatever. It just seemed easier because his name was easier to spell and pronounce.
Mhm.
And to starting a business when everyone else was worried about being a grandparent. And
Mm.
and I got some kickback. So there's social expectation. I was so perplexed that people weren't excited for me. So I
Mm.
think this is why it requires a boldness. So I want to dig
Yeah.
into that midlife. You're seeing this place where people make bold moves and have this gorgeous
Mm.
success.
Mm.
What is making that click? Is it because they honor that internal desire? What are some of the things you're observing here?
I think that people are finally kind of more midlife, waking up to the reality that they need to live on their own terms and get out of this state of mind, which I call the should problem. And
Yes, yes.
you were just talking about that, Diana,
Yeah.
that the expectation, whether it's
Mhm.
societal or it comes from your family. Expectation can come from a lot of different places, and it can have a really big impact on the decisions we make. And I think that people who make bold moves are less influenced by the
Yeah.
shoulds, but they only get there more at this midlife place, right? Because
Yes. Yeah.
so much of your 20s and your 30s, you are learning and you're taking advice from other people because you don't really know. You're kind of a
Yeah.
fish out of water a little bit, right? You're just trying
Yes,
to
exactly.
figure it all out. You're trying to experiment a little bit in some different lanes, but you're taking a lot of guidance and input from other people. And I think in your 40s and later, you have enough experience to know what you like and
Yeah.
what your values are, what you think your purpose is in a lot of cases. And that really grounds you in who you are. And
Yes.
so once you have this firm grasp on who you are, then you can make choices that are rooted from that place, which to me is the brilliance of the midlife click, because instead of feeling disempowered, which would be the sentiment that comes up in a midlife crisis, or, in a midlife crisis, you might feel anxious.
Mhm.
You might feel, like sad. You might
Yeah,
feel
a lot of disappointment because it's done
disappointment.
against the
Exactly.
barometer of what's expected. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there might be a lot of that. But in the midlife click, when you feel really grounded in who you are and the decisions you're making, it's all of it is opposite. So it's empowered, free, alignment with who you are, which is the ultimate form of freedom, in my opinion. I've just experienced that for the first time this year. So those are some of the things about the midlife click. I want to change the narrative because I think it's been in the narrative for too long. And
Yes.
there's another side of it. I don't know if this would be interesting to you, Diana, but I actually did some research about the midlife crisis because I was curious to know, how did this come to be? How did we
Yeah.
get here talking about this midlife crisis? So I
I
don't know,
would
is
love
that
for you to
interesting?
share, some of the highlights that you saw in that
Totally.
are so different than the people that click.
Yeah. So midlife crisis stems from the notion that the best of life is behind you. And that
Oh,
the
how
end of the
depressing.
road is the only thing ahead, Diana. So it's really based on attention to mortality. And I think, this notion of the midlife crisis was invented in 1957 by a physician and psychoanalyst named Elliot Jacks. And so if you can think about that, 1957 was quite some time ago in a way different era than where we are today. And so many things have changed. There might be a more imagination around what's
Mhm.
possible in our older years and not so
Yes.
much about this attention to uh-oh,
Yeah.
life is
Uh-oh, it's
over.
over. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But even think about
Um,
that, as a coach, as a mindset. Can you and everything in our culture we subconsciously do adopt at some level. Like as we hear it way too often or it's imparted by our family. Like, I know I'm doing these years very differently than my parents. They started immediately, it was all vacation when they retired. When here I am, I'm not retiring. I'm like doubling down on my business at an age that my folks were just worried about being grandparents, which is fine, but it's just so different. And, our health is different. There's not a requirement to actually retire because of the opportunity for consultancies and really running our own business. But yes, any thought, even though we haven't like actively adopted it subconsciously, if we're thinking the best of life is behind us, we're operating out of disappointment.
Exactly.
And it's just like, well, I don't know about you, but when you're disappointed, how powerful are your decisions?
Yeah, not great, right?
So that's where you can see, just from that alone, what else did you learn from the research you did?
Yeah, and I want to make a point about that too, but there is something else in the research that was interesting. So there's a correlation, I suppose, or the way that researchers, have amplified this midlife crisis terminology is through studying happiness. And they have found that happiness dips gradually through early adult life until its lowest point, which is right around the mid 40s to early 50s, which again is like that midlife crisis timeframe. And so then but the good news is that the pattern reverses itself after midlife. So older people tend to be happier than they would have thought 5 years earlier. So I think that the combination of it was kind of research based in terms of how Elliot Jacks came up with the midlife crisis, because in his work, he was talking to a lot of artists at the time, and he was noticing how their attitudes and mentalities were shifting in that midlife timeframe. And then on a global scale, we have this happiness research that also shows people's happiness tends to dip in that like 40s, 50s timeframe. So it does kind of add up to, the midlife crisis. But in my experience interviewing people who make bold moves, I don't want to disregard the fact that there is a crisis that can happen in midlife. I do definitely think that happens for people if it's, but I don't know if it's a widespread life crisis or there's like, certain things that happen. For example, like for me, I experienced just some turmoil within my job situation. I don't call that a midlife crisis, but it definitely happened in the middle of my life. And it made me think about things differently and what I wanted out of my next career move, which was, and the decision-making process for me was different than it had previously been. It was much more about what do I want, not what title am I shooting for, right?
Yeah.
Which is, again, that outside that outside expectation guiding my decisions. Actually, I was being guided more from an internal place this time around. So that's what made it different for me.
Yeah. And of course, I see this a lot. And you just think that the confluence of that time, your kids are like, if you classically have kids, if you're in your mid 40s, your kids they're in their teens, they're starting to make decisions around college if they're a little older. And then also aging parents, like there can be a lot of converging circumstances that really are real. And, of course, you and I see those also, where corporations are set up, like we no longer have these lifetime careers. And so there's this, there is ageism, there is just natural, like, oh, well, you're slowing down and now we're bringing in the whole next generation and your expertise. And so there can be and that may have come from that old thought that a certain age is the right age to retire, right? So I think, though, the power of this conversation can happen by, if you're willing, to really share how you made this bold move and what really, really supported you on honoring your desire. This desire path I don't talk about it in this way as often with my clients, but I ask them more often than not in the first 6 weeks we work together, what do you want? And then we go deep, and we go deeper and deeper and deeper, because that's the compass. And that is something we're not talking about. It's like we don't have permission to do things the way that might be a little different. Like, you were on this path to be, big corporate, and things were growing, and you've done great. You've won awards. You've, had great growth.
Yeah.
But so people outside might be like, why would you do that now? And it only comes from their lack of bravery, etc., or it doesn't fit in the path to the job, the promotion. And our companies aren't set up for that anymore. They really aren't. What was your knowing that really teed you up for your bold move?
I spent about, a good year, if not a year and a half, doing career coaching, Diana, because as I mentioned, I was feeling some turmoil in what I was doing. I wasn't necessarily feeling satisfied in my career. And instead of, just trying to change jobs haphazardly, as I had done in the past, I decided that I wanted more answers than that. Right.
Yeah.
And so the way that I knew how to do that, or the way I thought that I could think about doing that, was hiring a career coach and working through some of the deeper questions.
Yes. Sounds like a little more life coaching, career coaching, where you were personally met with what was going on.
Well, for you. Also, and I was just about to say, complemented by therapy.
Yes.
So I was kind of doing, both simultaneously. So I think that helped give it more of a holistic, I don't know that I would like I said, I don't know if I would classify it as midlife crisis, but I was definitely feeling some despair, turbulence, demoralized. I just wasn't feeling empowered, and it's not as if like I started career coaching and all of a sudden overnight, everything was better.
Yeah.
It took a lot.
So nice if it was that way.
Right. I mean, I really had to work through all of those feelings and try to understand them. And that took a while,
Yeah. I love that you gave yourself some space to, and this is the work that all life coaches love, is helping people human through. Yeah. Because if we do these things too fast, we lose, like, that is the example you gave. It's like we think we can solve things. And sometimes job changes are fabulous. That's how we build a career. We go learn a new skill set. We have another opportunity to grow, or we need to leave because things are not it's not a great work environment. But the working through is the slowing down and honoring what you were experiencing. And I think that sounds like that was a powerful piece of this.
Totally. And I remember specifically my career coach trying in our sessions to switch my energy from the low energy state of, I think it's called catabolic energy, to anabolic energy. And she would ask me, what are you curious about, to help me start thinking about new opportunities? Where would I want to go next?
Yeah.
And I would say, like, my brain was locked into not even being able to understand like, what I was curious about, because I was so, stuck. Yeah, stuck is the right word.
Yeah.
But over time, and after dedicating the work to uncovering, why I was feeling the way I was feeling and all of that, then I was like, okay, I can start to see what I'm curious about. I can start to see what's going to light me
the layer
up, right?
of grief, or the layer of whatever was going on for you was kind of lifted, it sounds like.
Yeah, 100%. And so, it took about a year, but I finally was able to feel really confident about how to move forward. And then there was a universal moment where I call it that because the universe came in and swooped into my path, and I was laid off from my job.
Oh, my word.
And well, it was a blessing in disguise. And I know that's not the case for so many people. And so I'm not trying to
Yeah, we don't want to over glamorize this. I
over
agree. Being very
glamour.
honest about
Yeah,
how that
exactly.
is a rough journey too.
Yes, exactly. Right. So definitely, but my experience was that, my earlier in the year, about 2 months, no, 1 month prior to the layoff happening, my career coach asked me if I could look back at the previous year and make any changes, what would I do? And I said, I would have quit my damn job.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
1 month later,
Oh my
I got laid
gosh.
off.
Yes.
Right. So I don't know. I call it a universal intervention because I was ready for my next bold move. And I was too scared, and I
Yeah.
think so many people can relate to that,
Yes.
that uncertainty, the risk, you're adverse to risk. It's so scary to take a leap of faith. And I was definitely holding on because of my fear.
Yes.
And then the universe said, "Well, I'm going to cut I'm going
Here
to
we
cut you
go.
loose."
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're going to be on this journey. And so I not quickly, right? Of course, everything takes a bit of time, but because I had done so much work
Yes.
previously, I was pretty quick to be off to the races. And I said
Mhm.
to myself, I don't want to submit my resume right now to other companies. I am curious. I've always been very entrepreneurial. I started another business several years ago at this point, and I still have that entrepreneurial itch. I have a great desire to write my own story, to live life on my terms. And it's not to say that you can't do that within a corporate environment, but for me, this was my
Yeah,
path,
that was like honoring your knowing and honoring your own
Mhm.
wiring and what you'd learned during that season.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to submit proposals to people for fractional content marketing leadership roles and see what would happen. And I was, experimenting. I'm still experimenting,
Yes, I
we're
think that's just part of
always
it.
learning and testing and trying. But, things kind of started to come together from there. And that's how I got on my new path. And literally, my podcast and my new business launched a day apart. Initially, I had been planning my podcast because of my curiosity that my coach had helped me
Oh, that's so
unlock for
wild.
myself.
Yes.
And it did stem from this idea of I just want to learn from other people about how they're making bold moves. And then their insights, I will learn from their insights.
Yeah.
And then maybe I will feel more confident, more courageous to take the steps that are right for me. And I also launched it with the knowing that if this is something that's holding me back, surely it's holding other people back.
Yeah.
And so maybe together as a community, we can learn how to make bold moves together. And so that's the journey of the podcast that launched the day before my business did.
I love it. With no intention of that being both like the
Yeah,
parallel path.
exactly. No intention.
I think this is just so gorgeous to, share with the audience because we will always look at people that have made bold moves. I know people look at me that way.
Mm.
And yes, there have been ways that I have been very brave, but it was all from just making sure I was doing things in the world that I knew I was supposed to be up to. And I just kept going with lots of fits and starts.
Mm-hmm.
And for you
Yeah.
to have been paying attention to your emotional, like what you were experiencing emotionally, the frustrations, the disappointment, the not being like yourself, basically, by you giving yourself that time, you teed yourself up to be prepared. I don't think it would have been much
Mhm.
longer after you launched that
Mhm.
podcast that you would have been taking those steps.
Yeah, definitely right. Something was going to be
Yes,
changing in the not so far future. I was just
exactly.
trying to figure out how to do
Yeah.
it. But, my coach also said something that I think about a lot, which is contrast gives you clarity. I think that's so true. If you are feeling on a, pretty continuous daily basis that something is not right, it probably indicates it's time for a change, right? And it's then Then it's
of
like
some sort, yes.
peeling back the onion layers to discover what is needed. And so, that brings me back to the
Mhm.
point about the midlife crisis, midlife click conversation. I think that a midlife crisis paves the way for a midlife click. And where you're
Yes.
always going, I think this is true, right, Diana? And you can corroborate here, but I think in order to continuing to learn, grow, and get even more confident in what we're doing, there needs to be those setbacks along the way, right? And because otherwise,
Yeah.
you're just moving along in this very like numb place.
Yeah, and I think that that's misalignment. Like, I think if we could use the concept of alignment here, when we're on a path that, especially when we're in someone else's company, but it can be our own too, where people have talked about burning down their own business and starting over. When we continue going on a path of either outside expectations or doing things always the way we thought we should, or, and some of that for some people is fabulous, right? But when we are finding we are disappointed, things are not in a day-to-day way what we want to be doing or spending our time with, or we're overworking and we never intended to be in that
Right.
type of dynamic. It's an area where we all can go, I'm out of alignment with what I'm really meant to be doing. And it comes back from desire.
Yep.
Like you said, it comes back from we're not really around people that are lighting us up anymore. We might not be growing with the people we're around. And then we're not taking action towards what we really want. And for whatever reason, it can
Exactly.
be fear, like you mentioned. It can be, gosh, I'm not going to rock the boat here. But the frustration, the disappointment, I think comes when our own well-being,
Mm.
our souls, our hearts, our own like big ambition is like, you're not paying attention here. We're not on a path that feels good. What is happening? And it got your
Exactly.
attention. It's that, this alignment piece is, really honoring our own awareness. And I think your bravery, your bold move started when you invested in the coaching and therapy and knew that you needed to pay attention to what's going on. That's bold.
Yeah. And I want to say something about being bold that I really want, listeners to take away. Being bold does not mean a grandiose thing, right? Being bold is a
Yeah.
personal, it's defined by you personally, right? And it can be
Yeah.
in career, as we've been talking a lot about today, but it's also in life. For example, I
Yes.
look at my brother and he moved to Ireland out of a desire to, just live in another country and immerse himself in another culture. He also happened to open a cafe in Ireland after moving there. So I'm just saying that
Wow.
it's so many different
Yeah.
things, but it's rooted in what you want. And it's like straightening
Mm-hmm.
out the path or getting on the path
Yes.
to what your desire is.
Yeah.
And that can be anything. It
Yes.
just is like, it feels a little bit outside of your comfort zone. It feels a little scary. That's how you know it's a bold move, because you're like, you want it, but you're a little scared to go get it.
Yeah. I love this word. A bold move might be that you are
Ooh.
scarce-sighted. Like you're just as excited and you're just as, but there is always that fear because
Yeah.
whenever we do something out of the norm, our own, that's where our brain and emotional well-being can be really rocked because our brain is like overworking on trying to keep us safe and sane. And when we get these bold ideas of going to Ireland and then I'm going to open up, I'm going to open a restaurant, I'm going to do this, you're like
Mm,
taking that gorgeous time of digging into your desires so that you knew what you were going to do next, even though the timing became
yeah,
like not of your own. But in a way, it was like you were teed up for it because you could have just gone and gotten another job to figure this out.
exactly. 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 It's the self discovery.
What has been some of I would like to kind of close this click. Like, what is clicking for you and maybe some of the insights from your audience members that you've interviewed. Why would you never have done it any other way now?
Those are two really good questions. And the first thing that popped into my mind when you said, what is your click? I thought about this feeling I had when I was taking my cute little French bulldog for a walk in my neighborhood, probably a few months ago now. And I had this voice come to me, this inner voice come to me where it was like, I feel successful. And it jolted me kind of awake, like from my subconscious mind to my conscious mind, Diana. And I was like, what do I mean I feel successful? Because here's the irony. I'm building a whole new business from scratch. And success, typically, again, when we look at the shoulds and the expectations and the da-da-da-da, success is really tied to finances, right? Financial success, right? And I'm thinking, well, I just started this business a year ago. I don't know that, I can define it from I am successful, right? I mean, but I didn't say the voice wasn't I am successful. The voice was I feel successful. And so successful. I thought, okay, what does that mean then? What's the difference between being successful and feeling successful? And to me, the difference is peace, fulfillment, and this general happiness. It's not even really happiness, it's satisfaction. That's the right word, right? Because I think happiness is a changing state.
That can be elusive. Yeah. I think it's been overused in our culture, and that's the only reason it feels hard to use it. Yeah.
So I thought from that perspective, okay, that does make sense. I mean, I do feel more fulfilled. I do feel more satisfied. And so that's the midlife click. That's how I knew that I was going in the right direction. It just, again, it's that alignment word. So I think, to wrap up the midlife crisis click conversation, I think that people can feel good about going through a midlife crisis, whatever state that's taking, that's kind of throwing them into moments of reflection, moments of feeling that contrast, as I said before, but knowing that if they understand who they are and they start to move in that direction, they're going to find that click. And that's going to turn everything around and make the next, however many years feel empowering, freeing, and not as concerned about mortality as Mr. Jax himself invented so long ago.
Yeah. I love closing the loop that way. And I love just hearing the fabric of your own story. And it just illuminates this. When people think something is really wrong, now it can be just the emotions you were feeling, like you knew you were not feeling empowered and you had been living in a way that you really had been. And I think paying attention to that and not ignoring it is the most powerful part of being human and honoring your own path. Like, we don't give ourselves permission or time. And I think those, like as an observer from you sharing your story, honoring that, knowing that something was off for you, giving your own self the time and the support you needed, really teed you up to have the opportunity to dive in and open your podcast on the day you planned and open up your business on, wow, you did not plan this, but oh, look at this.
Yeah, exactly.
And I just think that highlighting those takeaways illuminates a big part of the work I do. It's the money goals and the number goals can be really helpful. Everybody's wired a little differently around that, the action piece. And those are great to have to keep like some barometer and whatever. But what's so powerful, and I've seen this in myself and in others, is we are feeling those feelings of pride and success and empowerment that you've created. That it is inevitable that you will be creating a really successful business, however it's measured.
Yes.
I don't know how that hits you, but that's the observation is that you have, by getting back in alignment with more who you were and honoring that there were bigger things you wanted to be up to, even if it was just the podcast for a season,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
That the key thing is giving yourself permission to feel the feelings that aren't feeling so great and honor the journey to figuring out why. Why do I feel off?
And now I have the tools to do that again and again and again when the misalignment comes back
Yes.
into my,
Yes.
because I don't have any doubt that somewhere along the road in my next 40 years, I'm going to have more crisis moments, right? I
Right.
know that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But now I feel more prepared to tackle that.
Yeah. I think it's a gorgeous, I love the way that you took your own disappointment or midlife crisis and turned it into a really powerful click. Because I felt it in the way that you talked about your business. I had no idea you'd only been in business a year. That is where we clicked, that, I love working with people, and I am that person that's going to I am going to do it my way, and realizing that is the most powerful way. And I love helping others to see that in themselves. I hope that that's what the audience can take. That if you are feeling the crisis edge or the disappointment, that this is a time you give yourself permission to look at it with a lot of support, no matter what stage of life you're in, and then take some steps to really doing what you most intended in your life.
You said it so well. Couldn't agree more.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing your story to the table. We can talk about the things you're learning from others. I can talk about what we're learning from others, but when we share the nuances of our own stories, we really are in a position to help others see themselves. And that's what I want to create here. And you've helped me do that today.
That's beautiful. Thanks, Diana, for having me.
Oh, thanks, Kristen. This might not be the last time we have a conversation like this.
I hope not.
Yes, there's going to be more. I can't wait to dig in more to your podcast and the things that you're doing. Will you share with the audience, if they are ready to just even just think of the possibility of becoming a bold and noteworthy brand themselves, how do they get in touch with you?
Thank you for that opportunity. You can visit KristenRocco.com. Pretty easy, just my name, KristenRocco.com. That's my website, and it has everything about my fractional content marketing business, where we can see if we're a good fit to work together in that way. It also has details about my podcast. So if you're interested listening to Bold Moves, How Did You Know, and hear from other bold movers and shakers, you'll find everything that you need there. I also have a Bold Moves, How Did You Know podcast club, which is a monthly email where I share my top takeaways from podcast guests over the month, and also tell everybody what I'm up to from my Bold Moves desk. Again, the idea is just to inspire and encourage us all to move forward in our journeys. Once you sign up, I will give you the Bold Moves recipe that I talked about on this podcast. So you'll get it in email form and can start thinking about it and how it can help you.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. Our paths have crossed. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Diana, thank you. You're such an inspiration. I love the work that you're doing, and your story is inspiring. Starting a business at 55, it just shows everybody what's possible, and to not restrain yourself.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In a sheepish way, I have started, and I'm not going to be sheepish, because I'm realizing I know the stories of my clients and the stories of those I interview really make an impact with others. I think all of us need to realize that our stories do really matter, and we do need to be sharing them, especially in conversations where you're realizing it's like, hey, I have handled something like that, and this is what I did. I want to encourage you. I think we're just in a season in our culture that encouragement is needed.
100%. Well, thank you again, Diana. This has been amazing.
Thank you, Kristen. All right. That is it for today. I encourage you to go to Kristen's podcast, be a part of her community. And if you need something more from me, I'm Diana at DianaMurphyCoaching.com. Thanks so much for being here today.